Hey guys, it's Raz. All right, our last video on our agriculture unit for Unit 5 is on sustainable agriculture. So again, going with my motto of when you know better, do better, right? Looking at things that we can do to make our current agricultural system more sustainable, but still be able to feed our growing population of people. So when we think about sustainable agriculture, really we're focusing on the soil. We're focusing on making sure that the soil we have is good, solid soil, because that's the root of a lot of the issues that we're facing. So we look at soil conservation techniques that are going to be ways or agricultural techniques in which we minimize erosion. Because currently the US is losing topsoil about 10 times faster than it's able to be formed. So if we continue doing what we're doing, we will eventually not have topsoil to grow our crops in. So when we look at soil conservation, we're looking at doing several things. We're looking to prevent the loss of nutrients in the topsoil, to prevent the loss of moisture, to prevent the loss of decomposers in that topsoil, because that's hugely important to a lot of those biogeochemical cycles. And we're looking to prevent the loss of organic matter that's also going to trap soil moisture. So you have a little connection there too. So there's several methods that we can use to do that. The first is something called contour plowing. So the idea with contour plowing is you look at the natural slope of the land, and when you kind of plow your fields, you do so in a way that follows or goes parallel to the slope of the land. So what that will do is it means that water is not going to just run straight down the slopes. It's going to sort of be caught in some of those kind of plowed versus not plowed areas. So it kind of forms these little mini, like we call them terraces, right, which you're going to actually see next, but mini terraces that are going to catch water, and that's going to conserve soil moisture and also prevent runoff. Now, this is similar to the idea of terracing, but terracing is going to happen more on really steep slopes. So if you think of a pretty steep hillside, we can cut these kind of platforms into it. So basically, you get this series of almost like big steps, right? Like a giant staircase going up a steep slope. Those terraces are flat. So they're going to catch water. They're going to prevent it from becoming runoff and from eroding the soil. Again, similar to contour plowing, but this is steep slopes. The other thing that we can do, one of the things that we're a push is for perennial crops. So planting crops that are going to live year round, that can be harvested numerous times, or even if they can't be harvested numerous times, that are not something that's going to last a year and then need to be replanted. So annual crops, right, are things that you have to plant every single year. And with annual crops, we tend to find that their root systems are not as deep, right? Makes sense. If something is growing in the same place year after year, it's establishing a really robust root system. And you can kind of see that in those images below the note section. So if we have stronger, more robust root sections, we have more things holding the soil to where they need to be. So we have less soil erosion. The other thing is we don't ever have bare soil in between plantings, right? We always are going to have some sort of a root system and some sort of a plant, even if it goes dormant, right? That's there to prevent that bare soil. Less bare soil, less runoff. Okay. Some other things that we can do, and actually you see this next one that I'm going to talk about a lot around here are the idea of windbreaks. So wind is obviously a huge contributor to soil erosion. And when you have big open fields, wind can whip across them. So if we plant windbreaks, so tall trees, some other kind of plants that are going to basically take that wind, push it up and over, and break the force of the wind. There's a lot of like secondary bonuses to this, right? Obviously, we're decreasing soil erosion, yay. But depending on what you plant, those can be fruit trees, right? If you plant rows of apple trees out here, now you've got a secondary source of income or a food source. It can also be used as firewood, right? If you're kind of planting and cutting and planting, that'll work. And you're providing habitat, right? Pollinators and other species like those big trees. And even if it's just a strip of them, they're going to live there. So we're increasing biodiversity as well, which if you're planting next to croplands, you want pollinators anyways. So bonus. The other thing that we're seeing a push for is this idea of no-till agriculture. So typically, after we plant, like when we're getting ready to replant, we'll till or we'll sort of remove the old crop and kind of turn the soil. Seemed to always kind of be something that would be good, but what we're finding is actually not great. When we till things, you can kind of see over here, we end up first of all, causing more release of greenhouse gases as we kind of stir that system up. We see more runoff because now we've sort of disturbed the natural stuff, and we see the loss of the natural soil structure. So microbial activity will increase, but we see compaction below. It's just not a good scenario. Not tilled areas, right, have that nice soil profile. We get our nice robust organic layer at the top, and we leave the leftover crop there. So we're reducing runoff, but we're also increasing the amount of nutrients that are able to be absorbed back into that natural ecosystem. It doesn't look as pretty, but it's really good. And then the other thing we can do is this idea of strip cropping. Whoops. So strip cropping is another name for intercropping, where we're going to plant something that's a pretty dense crop with something that's less dense. So think rows of corn with wheat planted between them. We went out to Pennsylvania and stayed in Amish country for a while. And when they plant their corn crops, they plant, I think it's alfalfa, but it's a grain that they then use to feed their cows. So they do this strip cropping naturally, prevents runoff. They get 2 crops out of it, which bonus, right? And again, if you can plant things that are companion plants that kind of help each other out, you're helping your crop as well. All right. I should probably go back here and pause for a second because you're going to have to do these notes. Okay, moving on. All right. So next part is that we can look at improving the soil fertility. So that was all kind of how do we keep soil there. It was fertility too and some of the side effects, but really focusing in on restoring nutrient levels in our soil, particularly nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, and magnesium. Those are 4 really important ones for plants. So one of the things that we'll do is rotate our crops. Certain crops are very nutrient demanding of certain nutrients, right? And others will actually replenish that soil. So if you replant the same crops in the same way, you deplete the soil of whatever nutrient it is that that plant is using. When we rotate crops, we can let the soil recover. So corn is a very nitrogen demanding crop. If you've planted a field of corn for a couple years, it's good to then plant in something that's nitrogen fixing. For example, peas and beans and like other kinds of legumes have the bacteria in their root nodules that will return that nitrogen to the soil. So if you go back and forth between those two, you're maintaining a balance of nitrogen in that soil. The other thing that we're starting to see more of, and this kind of is along the idea of no-till, but it's using what we call green manure. No, it's not green poop. It's leftover plant matter from a cover crop. So the crop that gets planted in maybe the off season between harvesting to try to make sure that our soil does stay there. We'll cut it down before we replant the main crop, but leave the green stuff there. Okay, so the cover crop, again, will do its job by limiting soil erosion in the off season. And then as it's cut and it's left there, we'll also continue to release nutrients into the soil. So we kind of reestablish a lot of the nutrient levels that we need and help our soil fertility. The other thing that we can do is we can add limestone. If you've ever limed your gardens or people are liming their yards at home, this is what you're doing. Limestone releases calcium carbonate, which is a base, and it'll neutralize acidic soil. So in a part of the country here where we have lots of acid rain and typically our soils will trend more acidic, lime is really important. Acidic soil, acids by nature have really high hydrogen ion concentrations, and that will actually remove positively charged nutrients, from the soil, leaches right out. So acidic soil is not great for plants because you're losing a lot of the nutrients that you need. And it also makes toxic metals more soluble in the soil, which is not something we want. Okay. So liming helps kind of neutralize some of that. And you can see in this graph over here, it's kind of showing you the aluminum concentration, naturally occurring aluminum concentration in some cases, but also from things we put in our environment. And you can see that as the pH becomes lower, so as it gets more acidic, the aluminum concentration increases pretty drastically. And you can see kind of when it becomes toxic. So again, keeping things a little bit more neutral is super important. And then, sorry, I'm trying to move myself again. There we go. Calcium was kind of one of the nutrients I was mentioning is also leached out through this process. And that's something that plants really need. All right. The other thing we can do is something called rotational grazing, right? Which is just making sure that if we do have livestock grazing in an area that they're rotating around. Obviously overgrazing can kill plants. That's not good. We get more topsoil erosion. We can compact the soil, which again, we know also affects water retention. and it can lead to further erosion. So we actually find too that rotational grazing can actually promote, I mentioned this in one of my other videos, can actually promote more growth because those plants are encouraged as they're clipped back to grow deeper root systems. Kind of cool. All right, we already did that one. All right, so we're going to stop here. Make sure you finish up those notes, answer the questions that are linked to the Edpuzzle if you're doing the Edpuzzle, and we'll talk soon.